Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. I'm Adam Simmons, and here with me is Jeff Pearson. It's going to be at GIS_dog on Twitter. Jeff, go ahead and give yourself an introduction and tell me who you are.
Sure. My name's Jeff Pearson. I'm out here in Denver, Colorado. Cheers, everybody. And I am a GIS enthusiast. I work for a big GIS company, and I'm excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I put out a call tonight, and I think I might start doing this a lot more often, thanks to Glenn Leatham, who kind of inspired me. Just a call out for folks who just want to come on late night and chat and have a general geospatial discussion about just about anything. Jeff answered the call, and we're going to get started. So I want to know where did you start your geospatial career? How did you get involved with that?
Sure. So I was actually in the Air Force. I was security forces, which is essentially a cop. But within security forces, you can do many different things. You go K9, CADM. You can write tickets, do nuke security, anything like that. I decided to do what's called the Phoenix Raven program, which is essentially an air marshal within the Air Force because they fly all around. And when we're landing the planes on austere airfields, you have to make a determination as the security expert where you should be landing that actual aircraft. So that was kind of my first introduction into GIS. Kind of looking at maps, looking at topography, and all of these features to make sure that the crew and the aircraft were safe when we were downrange. So that was kind of my first taste for sure. So it was pretty cool. I got to fly to over 30 different countries, and it was an experience for sure, especially for someone so young. I was 20 when I was doing that, so it was really good.
Was that a decision after you left the Air Force? Is like, you know what, this is the industry I want to get involved in, and how did you do it?
No, so the industry that I initially tapped into was environmental science. So my bachelor's degree I did at a small school in South Florida called Nova Southeastern University. I did that environmental science. I was an environmental scientist for a few years doing environmental impact statements, and I took a whole bunch of GIS courses when I was in college. So I got hired on pretty quick because I had those skills within GIS because I had the academic background, I had the professional background, so on and so forth. So I was doing environmental impact stuff for the federal government and an A&E firm, and I wound up going into software development in GIS with the USGS afterwards, and that's kind of my big leap into GIS specific stuff. So now I have a pretty strong background in doing dev, doing web maps, and web, pretty much everything, and HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the whole nine, and it's all awesome for sure.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So for those of you who don't know, I'm also prior Air Force, started out as an imagery analyst as well. So it's always interesting to see how folks get involved in the industry, because you never know, their backgrounds could be completely different. So I'm kind of curious. So based off of it, what kind of timeline was this for you over the last since you got out of the Air Force, getting involved where you are today?
So I got out of the Air Force in 2011, and I went to school. I had done a bunch of courses when I was downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff, so I didn't have to go to school for as long as the typical 4-year program. I got it done, I think, in 2.5 years, and I worked for the A&E firm. Came out to Colorado from South Florida after working there for about 2 years, then worked for Federal Highway Administration, then left there and went to the USGS and did the software development. I had one of the coolest titles I've ever had. It was called the Vector Systems Project Manager, which sounds way cooler than what we were doing. And I still have a bunch of those cards that I sometimes hand out to look cool. But no, it was an awesome experience for sure. Yeah. So
what would you say, what keeps you in the industry? What do you like about it the most?
So I initially wanted to go into environmental science to really make an impact, right? But what they don't tell you about environmental science is that it's a lot more political than it is science a lot of the time. So GIS is definitely a way to make an impact, right? So I'm working on this COVID thing now and modeling, and I'm having meetings with governors and the CDC admins and stuff, and using my models and my spatial stats are really making a difference with planning for hospitals and things like that. So what keeps me in the industry is the impact, like the direct impact that I make on a daily basis. So I think it's awesome for sure.
No, that's great. No, I think the humanitarian missions that I've been on in the past has been one of my bigger inspirations just to stick with the industry. In the Air Force, I worked on the California wildfires when I was over at Beale, U2 and Global Hawk. And that was a taste of doing something a lot different than just doing the missions out in Afghanistan or Iraq. And I was like, whoa, well, this stuff can be used to really help people. Obviously it can, but actually being a part of it's like, okay, this is cool. Now I understand that this can be a lot more than, DOD and defense. And that was a huge impact on me, just sticking with it.
So. Yeah. So did you work on rimfire at all out there?
I was aware of it. I don't believe that was what it was called, honestly. So 2007 wildfires was the wildfires that really I got involved with. There was a brief stint in 2008, but then as there were some weird areas where we actually had to back off because it was more the federal government couldn't get as involved in as we should have, or as everybody wanted us to, just because of Title 10 and all the issues that comes with federal supporting local officials and having the government move in and support in that level. So we had to rely and support our guard brethren more so from behind the scenes and say, if you guys need training or support, and support the guard analysts that were working alongside of us, because they're the ones who had to get the job done more than us. But we helped stand up the operations back in 2007 to help support the wildfires, at least just to help lay the groundwork for some of the best practices.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I mean, so out there where you're at, you're working for mostly government customers, or are you on the commercial side?
It's a little bit of a mix. Right now, I'm a business-to-business consultant for my day job. And for those who don't know, because I don't talk about my day job on the show too much, but a lot of it gets involved with helping machine learning companies or companies working on machine learning understand where they can apply machine learning. For example, understanding understanding as an imagery interpreter what I look at, and helping the machine understand what they can pick up as well. So not only do I help with some of the labeling techniques, but saying, hey, look, these are the types of features I identify on a facility or an object. And I work with the data scientists or the machine learning experts and say, hey, can you train the machine? Is it feasible to train the machine based off of what I look for? And usually the answer is yes. But there's also some unique pattern of behavior that's a little bit more complicated on a second or third degree that the industry hasn't quite come to the technological level yet. So it's coming in baby steps, but it's getting there. And so aside from that, I also help with building outreach around products and services of different companies. So a lot of folks like selling products and services, but they fail to recognize that if you don't get the users on board with your product or service, and this is specifically towards geospatial applications or even if you're trying to sell geospatial data, even imagery, you think it's a no-brainer that, hey, this is imagery. It's comes as a 0.3 or 0.5 meter imagery. You think that it sells itself. It doesn't. You actually have to convince people that they want it. But even more than that, does this image type work within their workflow? You have to understand their workflow. And from a government customer, it can be a little bit challenging because those government customers or those government analysts have an established workflow, have an established pipeline, and anything that's new or slightly different, they have to write those policies or those integration of a new workflow addition within what they're doing. And that could be a struggle. And if it's either too much work or the initial work seems like it's too much work, you might lose them right away if you're not giving them a good adoption around the product or service. So more hands-on training, or just say, hey, look, let me walk you through it and not overwhelm you on what this is. Promise you this is going to help you out in the long term and shortcut your time instead of make it longer, right? So
yeah, yeah. So are you an open source guy? Are you an ESRI guy, or where do you fall in
so
that
I don't want
realm?
to step on any toes, so because from Project Geospatial, we love listening to everybody, and I'll admit I have grown into that more so. When I was in the Air Force, I was not a fan of ESRI. I'll be straight up, and more so is because it seemed like an elitist tool. And what I mean by that is ArcGIS, the big agencies like, NGA or some of the other ones, that could afford the licensing. But when you're coming from the squadron level, we were coming from, not to say that, software such as Socket GXP was not expensive. It definitely was. Definitely, it took me a while to learn that as well. But considering that when you buy ESRI, it's almost like buying Apple. You're buying into the ecosystem. And at the time, I was a hardcore believer that, man, I can't use this stuff because, one, we didn't have the computers to support that level of those large software suites. And then we didn't have the training. It just was too complicated. I'm like, you open this tool up and it had a couple thousand different buttons, and I'm talking about, ESRI as it was 15 years ago. It's come a long way since. So, and so I had to grow into liking it. So once I moved to my assignment at the Pentagon, I actually started diving into ArcGIS a lot more, started learning it, started appreciating its uses. And mind you, they had a couple iterations where they simplified a lot of the tool suite a lot more. So I got my training more on Socket GXP and Remote View. And Remote View that was a pricey license, but it was actually a very simple tool because it was more aimed at imagery interpretation and almost nothing else, especially the earlier versions. So, but you have to also understand the community in which I started. It was a much more simpler time where my whole job when I was the first couple of years in the Air Force as an imagery interpreter was tactical imagery. And I hate to say this, but you almost didn't even need an electronic light table. You can almost take the image, run a screenshot, throw it into PowerPoint, write your annotations, and send it out the door. And no one wants to admit that, but you didn't actually need an expensive imagery suite.
Yeah,
you didn't. And the same with the FMV. I actually, a couple of us, you had the big contractors coming in, and this isn't a hate on ESRI. This was actually a hate on big contractors trying to rip us off in the Air Force back then, because a lot of us were even bringing in video feeds using these expensive video software suites, and I ended up using Windows Movie Maker to send these video clips out the door from FMV feed. And it was for free, and they hated me for it. So for the first couple of years, I started out with a grudge only because I was working with cheaper, more efficient tools, and they were trying to shove more expensive ones down my throat all the time. So, but I grew into a larger community. I understand their use cases and what I couldn't do with their free stuff, and that was a lesson learned. That was actually a huge lesson in humility as I grew not just in the Air Force, but in the commercial community as well.
Yeah. So what was your rank when you separated in 2012, you said?
Oh yeah. No, I was a staff sergeant.
Okay, cool. Yeah, same. I get out as an E5 as well. Good times for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So long-winded answer. So I like using open source tools. I really do. I started moving away from tool suites, and I focused around data. I'm a data collector as a hobby. I like finding open data out there, love exploiting it, love just seeing what's available, massive data tables. And actually, I would say that there are a lot more open data. In my opinion, there was a lot more open data even 5 years ago than there is now, because it seems like it's like a data gold rush right now, and everybody's locking that data behind closed doors. Yeah. And the data, in my opinion, if I focus more on the data, then I'll find a tool suite to fit what I need to do with that data. Like I have ArcGIS installed right now, and I'll use it for certain things. I have QGIS, and it to me it's a little bit easier from a quick button approach to do other things. And then I used to use Fusion Tables, Google Fusion Tables all the time. I was a huge fan of that before I got deprecated earlier last year. So.
Yeah, no, as far as that sort of ease of use, building, I'm a big fan of web maps, right? Especially if you have customers or if you have people that you're trying to get into a GIS, you can basically just put in 4 or 5 different widgets or, tools that that they're going to be using into the web map. I do have some experience with QGIS. We had to use it a lot when I was at the A&E firm, and then in academics. I think you're right. I think it is very easy to use. I think their Python interface I really like. So yeah, like I'm definitely not going to trash any of the open source stuff. I do like ESRI products for sure, but there's definitely a place for like GeoServer, QGIS, and kind of all those open sourse. Even Google Maps. You can pull into an API. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. And that was the lesson I learned. There's a use for it all. There's a few companies I've reached out to me for a specific solution. I'm like, Esri is probably better off. That's a solution that I can point them to. Once again, it's just one of those growing in humility of understanding what things are used for and why, and then and taking advantage of it. I was a staff sergeant rebel without a cause in some ways, just trying to make do with what I had and trying to make the mission work. I wasn't in the mood back then to deal with soliciting from left and right from all these vendors back then. So
yeah, I was a fan of being in the E4 Mafia for as long as I possibly could at the time. But, yeah, like I definitely see there being a
well, hold on there, Jeff. You said E4 Mafia, and I want to highlight there is I know what you're talking about. Go ahead and explain to the audience why that's a thing.
So the E4 Mafia, as I so say, is E4 in the Air Force is a senior airman, and the senior airmen are known for doing a lot of the brunt work. They've been in for long enough to know what they're doing, and they're leading younger A1Cs, but they're not quite at that NCO level. So the stipulation is that NCOs don't really do anything and the E4s do everything. So the E4s really run everything, and they call that the E4 Mafia. At least that was my take on it. And it was fun, being an E4. Especially as a security forces guy, running things on flight, and then having the NCOs not really have to do anything unless something big popped up.
Well, there's also this weird culture in that I don't know what it was, and because until you reach staff's E5's got a little bit of the love, but when you were in E2 and E3, for some reason you were like hot shit. Like you had an idea, and for some reason people listened to you. And I didn't quite understand why all the senior listed or E6s resented me a little bit because of that until I became a staff sergeant myself, and I'm like, oh man, I had all these good ideas, and why are they listening to this guy? He doesn't know what he's talking about, but it's not that he didn't, but I was like, man, why aren't you listening to me anymore?
Yeah.
So I can kind of almost understand this whole slide that the E5, E6s have into, okay, I gotta grow these people below me, and I gotta stop being full of myself too. There's a little bit of that.
Yeah, there's so when I was deployed to Balad in 2009, the E4s, I wasn't a part of this, but they actually evolved into something that they called the ARM. Have you heard of that? The Airman Resistance Movement. It was It was just a silly thing that they were trying to really run things on flight as far as the security forces guys go, and it got squashed pretty quick by the E5s and the E6s on flight. But I just thought it's a funny thing to bring up, especially for all the veterans that might be watching.
So that was a long time ago, folks, even for me. Yeah. And I'll give the Air Force a lot of credit. They have done a lot to turn around innovation and champion people in the military overall. And
absolutely, I 100% agree.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of watching. I mean, just all the startups and incubator stuff of supporting people inside the Air Force. And it used to be that if you were outside the Intel community, you had things like the IDEA program that were really helping you out. But for the Intel community or the geospatial community, it was very difficult because everything was kind of close knit from an information standpoint. And so, how do you get your ideas out there and supported by the unit when technically you can't talk about your ideas? So.
Yeah.
But they've turned that around a lot. And one of my old commanders, Colonel Jason Brown, he champions all these folks and talks about innovation in the Air Force all the time, or even the entire DoD. And he's a good person to watch on LinkedIn. A lot of his posts are pretty inspirational. Love checking him out a few times. He actually supported me when I was a staff sergeant with all my crazy ideas back then, and I guess he still does that, but on a much bigger scale now. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. So talking about open source versus ESRI, so I can definitely see there being a big thing now between being on premise and in the cloud. And I don't know if you have, an opinion either way.
That's
But
hard.
I definitely see a big push into the cloud right now from a lot of customers that I'm working with, for sure. It's a big initiative.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big push in the cloud, and so I work for companies who are helping with that transition, and that's a big thing. But there are scenarios where being in the cloud doesn't completely make sense. At least the case, and I'm not necessarily one of those folks who can make that argument or debate. I just know that there are issues like, I think the biggest one comes down to the cost factor. When your entire ecosystem is run on Amazon, for example, and let's say you have a small server network or a small application running a data set that is highly important to everybody, but maybe is not that big, doesn't require a lot of processing or computing time. Does it make sense to host it in the cloud if it's going to cost this much? And I think that's where the bigger debates are, is the smaller programs that do the bigger ones outweigh from a cost sharing standpoint the smaller ones? And at least when Amazon first got into the government, I don't think that was the case, and so a lot of smaller programs were fighting hard not to be in the cloud, and I think they still are. So there's a lot changed on the Amazon side too. So they've kind of rebalanced things out to make it more cost effective for even the smaller folks, and it's just about making the sales. Now, I guess the bigger question is it viable for disconnected ops? And and when I say disconnected ops, so most folks probably don't know what that means. Why do you need something that's disconnected? And I think the best scenario that I have for folks is, well, you can't always hardwire something in. You imagine like having servers on ships, for example, or having forward operating bases that might need their own data sets to run off of. Or for that matter, if we're talking about humanitarian efforts, suppose half the infrastructure goes down. Can you plug a box? Can you still have access to a mobile server that has all your data on it they can use in a crisis situation? What do you do then? What's the cloud solution for something like that? And I think there's a lot of answers to that, and more today than there was even just a year ago. So that's my short answer.
Gotcha. Yeah. No. I just did. So I'm pretty well trained up in AWS and EC2 and all that stuff. And I just did a bunch of training in Azure just recently. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is that if you're on Windows currently, if you're using like an R2 or something like that, then they actually give you credits towards the actual Azure storage fees if you're in blob storage or something like that, which I think is a lot of people don't really know about, right? And I'm not against AWS. I just think that a lot of people are on Windows, on-premise servers now, and Azure gives you credits towards their cloud storage if you switch off of your Windows, right? If you're on Linux or something like
Well,
that, they don't really
I
do
would
anything
say that
for you.
even
But
Google's doing something similar right now too. So, but definitely Azure. Azure and there's a lot of clouds. I'd say I'm not even sure I recommend Oracle at this point. I'm not sure anybody still, but yeah, definitely. But I don't think it's more on just the discounts and credits about which ecosystems work best for your use cases. So,
yeah,
for example, if I would argue that some of the Google technology was better for geospatial data, vector data especially. So, and most people don't even realize that from an imagery standpoint, because they work with things like Google Earth and Google Earth Engine for so long. Some of the image processing that they have in the cloud was arguably good too, debatable anyway. So what are you using it for? And is it good at cost? I think that's the other question. So I think there was also that cost benefit versus do they have the tools inside the cloud that work best for my use case. I think Amazon's come a long way, and I think they're highly competitive with folks like Google. But I don't even know if Microsoft has a cloud ecosystem, but I'm not even sure where they line up in terms of bringing geospatial data in, bringing imagery data in, and being able to handle that within their cloud compared to everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, Azure can handle entire enterprises, right, for geospatial and publishing out, imagery and stuff like that. I can't really speak to the Google. I've never deployed anything or used Google as hosting service or anything. But as far as Oracle goes, I'm familiar with the Oracle Spatial and Graph DBMS that you can use. But as far as their cloud services, I can't really speak to. I know that they did one of those contention things with the federal government, the AWS one, because they want the government to use, Oracle Cloud. So they, did their little protest or whatever. Don't think it's going to go anywhere, but it's also who's also FedRAMPed too is a big thing as well. I don't think Azure yet is FedRAMPed. Don't quote me on that. I definitely know AWS is, and I think Google is too, but no, I definitely think it's definitely worth having the conversation as to, what you're doing as an organization and then making the best, choice as to where you should go based on what your actual workflows are. I personally, I am biased towards AWS right now because I know the most about it, right? I can build a seamless workflow in it. But I'm trying to learn more about Azure right now because I feel like they're going to wind up popping up out of nowhere within the next 5 to 10 years. So I want to stay ahead of that curve.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. You don't want to get stovepiped into one type of ecosystem.
Yeah,
You just
absolutely.
for the sake of job security, I guess a lot of folks made that mistake with Microsoft back in the day, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Amazon came out of nowhere. Even Google came out of nowhere. So back more on geospatial, a lot of things have been going on. Have you been, I don't want to get too focused on what you specifically are doing, but I'm sure you are watching a lot of the COVID-19 maps that are out there right now. From your perspective, based off of what you've seen, a lot of the maps kind of regurgitate the data and redisplay and revisualize them. And I actually brought this up to Glenn Leatham the other day, and I'm really more curious about where do you see the market gaps or the gaps in what maps are not displaying, and what would you like to see in health maps?
So in health maps, and this is a big thing for me because my graduate degree is in health GIS. Up until this whole COVID thing, I had no practical experience doing anything with it. So I'm like a freaking kid in the candy store right now. I've been working with COVID nonstop for the last 3 weeks. The biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is one, there's not a published SIR model from the CDC or the WHO that emulates a bell curve. Partly because it's a novel virus, right? Like you can do it for flu, you can do it for typhoid fever, SARS, anything like that, because we know about it. There's not enough data right now to support where the bell curve is. When you look at all these maps, specifically for the John Hopkins map and all these maps, the recovery data isn't accurate. It's showing that there's like 100,000 cases in the US, but it's only showing like maybe 3 or 4,000 people who have recovered. So if you got COVID January 3rd, your little dot is going to pop up on a map and it's not going to go away even if you get better, right? When you get this, virus, you're either going to get better or you're going to die. It's just
So do you
how,
think
you know
there
what I
should be
mean?
some kind of
Right.
there should be some kind of rough expiration date for those?
Yeah, there's definitely not 100. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the GHU dashboard in a while. But there's definitely not 100,000 cases like everyone is reporting right now, because like I said, they're not taking those people off the map who had gotten it. Right now it's on average an 11 to 14 day turnaround time if you're under the age of 65 and not hospitalized. If you're over the age of 65 and you go in the hospital, it's like a 24-day turnaround. So if you get it, say January 1st, on the 25th, you'll wind up being okay. If you're over 65 on January, say 12th or 13th, you'll be okay if you're under 65. And those numbers are not accurate. So it's really interesting from a mapping perspective, because you want to be able to, basically prune those people off the map, right? Because they're not sick anymore. And that's specifically what's making my job super difficult right now, is one, because that recovery rate isn't accurate, and two, because the highest res data that we can get right now is county level. I think only New York City right now is showing, bureau wide, or whatever it's called, like Queens and Manhattan or whatever. Everywhere else, all you can get as far as res is county data, right? They're not releasing anything else. So it's really difficult to use spatial stats to sort of model this thing out in an accurate manner like everyone wants. Another thing people are also looking at is bed utilization, right? So if you look at specific hospitals, and I have a dashboard that I can post up on my Twitter here pretty soon that I did for a specific hospital in New York State, in a town called Binghamton, New York. And it's looking at a 20-mile buffer outside to incorporate all the other hospitals, right? And on average, about 12% of the total infected population has to be hospitalized. And I ran those models a month ago, and the CDC just came out 2 days ago that that's an accurate figure. So it makes me feel good about the models that I'm actually building. So I think they're at like 2,300 hospital beds for that 10-mile buffer outside of the Wilson Med Center. And so what's that, like 21,000 total infected populated? Then they can expect their actual med center to be overrun at that point. And it's kind of scary to put that into, a dashboard or something like that, because it could incite panic, right? If you see this gauge going up slower and slower and slower and slower, and then eventually it hits that, then it's, you know what I mean? So I can definitely understand, why a hospital specifically, or, a public health department would be hesitant to want to display that to the general public, because you don't want to, like, it's almost impossible to predict, human behavior, right? So
about health maps that might be more relevant or actionable on the individual level. What about maps that have you seen anything that says, hey, which of my local grocery stores are open, or which facilities are open in the current conditions that are now, that type of thing. That's we're talking about the reverse twist. Okay. So we understand that the crisis is going on. The virus has, the lots of data and trends to talk about the severity of it, but the reverse is great. I'm under, isolation. Occasionally I do have to go out and get supplies here and there. Where can I go to get these? That type of thing.
Sorry, you broke up. If you can.
Oh, sorry. No. I guess the question is, where would I? Is there any maps that highlight where people can go out and get supplies? Where?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Where there's help locally.
Yeah. I think if someone was able to make a map like that, I may try to give it a shot. Just because we're having this conversation, but it'd be difficult to update. You might be able to write like a backend Python script that scrapes maybe the Google, like if you Google, grocery stores around your house or something like that. But to have that map dynamically update, like how a lot of this COVID data is, that could be pretty challenging to do. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually a really bad cartographer. I got a C- in my cartography, class in college. So yeah, I'm definitely not a pretty map maker. And I apologize to everyone. I'm just,
No, that's not it. But
I
as
don't
long
have
as you
that
get the
artistic
data, as
ability.
long as the data is compiled, everybody else can make the maps. I think that's the golden part. That's why I like messing with the data. I'm not the best map maker myself, but if I can organize the data, I'm like, look, I've done my best with the data. Here you go. Here you go, world. You figure that out on the map visualization part. Because I think there is a need for where can I go to get supplies? Where are supplies low? Now I understand that's also a hard part because that's exposing the supply chain. Who's going to give that up? That's. But on the other hand, I think this problem is highlighting a need that we've had in every natural disaster. Imagine a hurricane. When your house has been destroyed, or you all of a sudden have a hard time finding supplies because drugstores or construction facilities have been all wiped out as well. Where do you get these goods when a natural disaster hits? I think it's the same scenario, and I have not seen very many of those maps, even in our traditional annual disasters that happen around the country.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think if someone was able to compile a data set like that, I think that'd be a really cool thing to send out to the public.
No, that's why I like watching the Waffle House Index, just because I think that's like the coolest thing, only because they have somehow transformed their own supply chain into a red alert status for the public. And I think that's pretty impressive. I'm like, man, wow. If the fast food industry had just kind of joined together in that way, that would be impressive as well. It's like, hey, we're low on supplies. We're still operational, maybe 10-man teams, but we can at least share with each other where we're having a hard time and create our own index on a much grander scale.
Yeah, no, I think someone was telling me about I didn't know that it existed up until about 3 or 4 days ago. And I was like, dude, it's pretty incredible how accurate that is too. They were telling me how it's like when they, I guess the whole concept is that when they close down, that means that they're pretty well at predicting if there's going to be a big thing in the area, right? I think that's what the whole premise is.
So the FEMA director, I think it was a surprise that even Waffle House when it first began, because I guess the FEMA director at the time, somewhere around 2011 or 12, around the Joplin tornadoes back then, he's the one who coined it. I guess FEMA was watching Waffle House and figured out the pattern. So when it's green, that means they're fully stocked and they have a full menu. When it's yellow, it means that they do not have a full menu, and it usually indicates that they're running off of generators because they're unable to make the full menu. And if it's red, that means the facility is fully closed, usually due to complete destruction of the facility or damage, or maybe it's underwater or flooded. But usually there's physical there's physical indications on why the Waffle House isn't operational. Now, this is a completely different scenario because the virus has shut everybody down. So there is no yellow. It's either green or red. So, and that's where I think the Waffle House Index in this scenario isn't completely accurate, because if Waffle House is red, most likely everybody else is red. So,
yeah, no, it's a really neat concept for sure, especially from a geospatial perspective, right? Like, is there like a hosted feature service that I can tap into to, you know what I mean? Like pull it into my own GIS.
Their website is very, I don't want to, so their website is very friendly towards scraping as a list. So what's kind of cool about their site is if you go to their locations on their website, their store locations, this is the cool part. I don't see this on other fast food restaurants, by the way. When they list their locations out and they show them where it's on the map, but each of their location listings indicate whether it's open or closed. And I'm like, okay, well, that's such a simple thing, but nobody else shows that piece of metadata. Whether it's open or closed. Usually it's lined up with somebody's hours. No, this is actual status of, is this facility closed or not? And they actually label that on their locations website. But yeah, you can literally grab the whole thing. I wonder if you can grab like a periodic daily snapshot of the Waffle House location list and create some type of database with that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really cool thing for sure.
Anyway, we got a little off topic there, but that's all right. It is geospatially relevant. But I think we're gonna wrap it up. Unless do you have any other? Do you have any specific plugs? Do you want to give, Jeff? Anybody out there, or any specific technology before we hop off?
No, I mean, anyone, please follow me on Twitter at GIS_dog, and please don't rip up the maps that I post every once in a while. I try to get better at cartography as time goes on, so you'll see me post, what I consider to be my best cartographic products, which is really kind of, not good a lot of the time. I try to go back to my course, and it's
a very friendly community, and I think very supportive community. So anybody puts out a map, everybody's more likely to just like it. But no, I've seen some. What's the one Twitter handle? Is it bad maps? It's terrible maps. And
something, it's something like that. And those maps are,
they do put out some bad
horrible
maps, but sometimes they really put out a bad map, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Did you really put that out there? Like,
man, as soon as I need like a self-esteem boost, I just go to that Twitter handle and I feel better about myself. So
yeah, right. Anyway, thank you for coming on, and I'll do my best to edit the episode after the fact, and everybody will get a chance to listen to this on all the podcasting platforms as well as YouTube over the next couple of days. If you tuned into us live, thanks. I'm going to do more of these late night geos discussion, and you're welcome to reach out at Project Geomedia on Twitter, and let me know what night you want to do this, and I'll stay up and we'll just have a general discussion about anything. And you're welcome to join back on anytime, Jeff, just to talk about anything.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate you having me on.
All right. Once again, I'm Adam Simmons of Project Geospatial, here with Jeff Pearson at GIS_dog on Twitter. Thanks everybody for joining.